All right, we are recording. This is the lessons for getting your land legs, which is Mondays at 4 o'clock Pacific time. You can adjust for whatever time zone you're in. And what I wanted to do today was go through some information that is really helpful in creating sort of what I like to think of like a skeleton in your mind that can be fleshed out with details later. And so we have a helpful resource that many of us on the 50 states have come to learn to use. And if you want to find this on the TASA website, I like to help people figure out how to use the TASA website also. If you look at the top in the search bar right here, it says TASA.AmericanStateNationals.org, and we're on the home page. What we're wanting to do is we're wanting to go to the education page, and the education page is so important that I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about how to get there. For one thing, you can go right here on the home page of the TASA, and you can click on click here to continue your education. That will take you to the education page. You can also come up here to the important information, and on that, there's a link here in this drop-down menu called Continuing Education. Another way to get there is to go to the 50 state assemblies. And when you go to the 50 state assemblies, you're going to notice in the browser that instead of it saying TASA.AmericanStateNationals.org, it says states.AmericanStateNationals.org. And you're also going to notice that the font up here on this horizontal menu is red. So notice that previously, if you go back just a moment in the video, you would see that there is the menu at the top there would be, the font would be black, and here it's much smaller and it's red. Here's the educational information, and also if you wanted to go to your state website or another state website, you could do that by clicking on here. Also, if anyone's brand new, one of the very first things anyone should do is contact your state coordinator. So if you've never contacted your state coordinator, you'll want to do that. It's an important way to know all about when the meetings are for your states, and find out if there's meetings on your county, and providing you important information to get started and all that kind of stuff. So that's a fantastic place to go ahead and click so you can be connected to your state coordinator. It's really also called an organizer. They're the ones really trying to help organize the effort. So after you come here and you go to the educational information, this is the education page of TASA. That's how I refer to it. And where there's handbooks, you can click handbooks here. It'll jump down to handbooks, or you can scroll down there. So I'm going to jump down there with the handbooks. And right here is it says the actual sovereign government. So if you've never discovered this before, this is going to be a fantastic aha moment. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And I like to explain what the importance is of all the information on here. Now, there are so many words on here that it can often be a bit confusing. So I'm going to actually leave this for a moment and go to a resource that I created on my own that I think is helpful for showing people how kind of the history of how this all started, and what the actual American government is. Really, we've all grown up with only the example and the modeling of what this corporate system of government service businesses just doing business on contract is all about. We've never actually observed the American government operating. So I'm going to let Phyllis back in. Okay. So one of the things I like to point out is that right here, this is our actual sovereign government, the lowercase u, United States of America. The reason this U is lowercase is because this is simply, the word united is in the role of an adjective. It's not part of the title. It's just describing that the states of America were united. And the title is States of America, the States of America. So what happened in history was that the states, which were actually, the 13 colonies began as colonies, and eventually those became something called estates. And the word estate has the word state in it. It's just that you have to drop the E off. So that's really where we get the name states. And those states all had a trust. We declared our independence and said that we didn't want the foreign influence, as many of us know, on the 4th of July, 1776. And within just a few months, we realized that if we were going to maintain our sovereignty as these 13 individual nations, that if we would give up some of our sovereignty and bind together in the international jurisdiction, that we would be able to much better fend off any attacks that might come our way of the Europeans that might come over to try to pick us off one by one. So the 13 colonies became states, and they all began to decide to share a piece of their sovereignty so that in being united, they would be able to be stronger together. They didn't give up all of their sovereignty. They just gave up very specific defined pieces. So on July 4th of 1776, we declared our independence. There's a fantastic musical that was created. I can't remember, it's back in the 50s or something, but if you look it up on YouTube or whatever, you'll find it. And you can get some really interesting insights from watching that, or at least see a version of what that would have been like. And it really does help transport you back into what a time might have been like before what we have experienced. So you'll see that between the, which is a capital T, United States, the capital U and the capital S, that's the title of the Union of States that was formed when we declared our independence. And that, there's a plus right here because we combined and we gave up a piece of our authority and we allowed it to become a separate entity. This is actually a holding company. This is the United States of America. And the is capitalized because it's actually part of the title. And that becomes important later. And again, this is in 1776. And then you'll notice that here there's an arrow because there's a delegation of power. And then this delegation of power, what happened was that they began to form their states. They had declared their independence from England, Britain, whatever. I don't know exactly how to say that, but I'm sure if Anna was telling this, she would be very precise in that. And they declared their independence, and they wanted to, be free of the encumbrances and the criminality, really. The criminality that was happening at their time is very similar to what's happening currently. And they wanted to throw off that oppression and that the corruption that was happening and the mistreatment that was happening. And so I think the 1776 movie does a good job of showing how close we came to almost that not happening and declaring our independence. And then when we bound together, one of the things we needed to start doing was putting together the pieces of government that are required. And what you've come to hear that called in the assemblies is the 4 pillars. I've heard Anna recently say that it wasn't necessarily called the 4 pillars back then. It was the 4 functions that government needs in order to function. So you can call it the 4 functions or the 4 pillars. And so they had their general assemblies, those who had decided that they were Americans and wanted to be on the side of being independent. And they were forming together to create their 4 pillars. And one of those was a business assembly. And then those business assemblies were in a position to be able to write contracts for certain government services to be taken care of. Anna often refers to this as, we were mowing our own yard, our own lawn from 1776 to 1781. And then we hired the lawn to be mowed. That's just, an analogy. But ultimately what happened was we, the people, made arrangements for certain things to be taken care of and thought through and provided for us. And so there were 18 powers that were delegated here to the 3 different corporations that were created. In fact, they were corporate entities. They were not incorporated. In the General Assembly Handbook, it does talk about the difference between corporate and incorporated. And so these were called, the Confederation States of America were called things like State of Pennsylvania, State of New York, but it was not State of New York Incorporated at the time that this began. And it was not called State of Pennsylvania Incorporated. It was simply called State of Pennsylvania. Why was it not called Pennsylvania? Well, the name Pennsylvania had already been taken by the state itself. And the states here, I don't have it on here, but they would have also been called, something like Virginia State or Virginia, that kind of thing. But over here, it wasn't actually the land. They weren't actually on the land. It was kind of like, here's the land. And then if you think of lifting off of that, a folder, it's more like a folder, an entity, a thing, a fiction. And in fact, I think if I understand correctly, the United States of America is actually a holding company also. So this is where the land is, and this is the holding company. And then this was another type of an entity. And this entity was a group of men and women on your state. You may experience that there's an international business assembly committee that's begun to meet and starting to talk about how do we want to interact with the government service providers like the DOT, like CPS, like the school districts, like all of these different kinds of entities that we want to rein in. So we're deciding about if we're happy with the job of mowing the lawn that's been happening. And if we can get our business entities to come under the public law and do the right thing, then we won't need to fire them. We might need to fire leadership and replace it. And so that we can get the men and women that are in positions of authority within the structures doing the right thing. So basically what we did is we hired out someone to mow our yard. And like Anna talks about, it was 1776 to 1781 as that was happening. Then if you look, what happened was, okay, so there was a war that happened. It was we declared our independence and we fought the Revolutionary War. The outcome of the Revolutionary War is that we were granted the land and soil jurisdiction. So we had the land and soil. We won it fair and square. It's been ours ever since. There's fraud and there's things that have happened, but one of the outcomes was that we had the land jurisdiction. Part of the peace treaty agreements included that we were required to hire the British for certain things and the Pope for certain things. And so we began over the course of many years to work out how that was going to happen. So 1781, there's an important document that you can look into called the Articles of Confederation. And that's when this is formed. And then it takes us several years. And Anna has recently written about this in an article. We can go look for it in a little bit, if that might be helpful. And we worked out that our federal Republican subcontractor was going to take care of most of the things that we were going to request to be done. And this business had a name. It was called States of America. And you'll notice that it sounds very similar to the States of America, with the being part of the title. But you'll notice that here, the doing business as is just States of America, and the is not part of the title. The good thing is that this portion is made up of American state citizens. You had to be a citizen with a single allegiance to your state in order to be part of this. And this is a business that is being operated by Americans. You had to be an American. And so that's in 1787. Between the ceasefire of the Revolutionary War and the peace treaties that are written, there's, I think, 13, maybe 14, somewhere in that area of peace treaties. They're written in French, which apparently was the language of the day that they would have done this in. And so we wouldn't be able to read them firsthand, but we can trust that other people could translate them for us. And they really defined the outcome and how this was going to happen. So as they began to create these agreements about providing services, they needed to write a contract. And that contract is called a constitution. It's where we, the people, or the people of a government, hire a service provider to provide the services in exchange for payment. And so it's a debt agreement and it's a power sharing agreement. That's the two important things to know about a constitution. It's a power sharing agreement and it's a debt agreement. One other thing to know about constitutions, and Anna actually wrote a whole article about this, is that in a different kind of an entity. Oops, I think we have a hot mic, Dave. The thing about a constitution is that there's a different kind of constitution that exists within the corporation structure. Remember, eventually these are replaced with incorporated structures. In the beginning, this was not incorporated and this was not incorporated. But eventually they do end up being replaced by incorporate, right? Like USA Inc. or United States Inc., things like this. So when they replaced them, they had the corporations that were incorporated that took over had a different type of a constitution. It's really a charter within their company. They just had their constitution sound exactly like the previous constitutions with small adjustments to them. It was really kind of a doppelganger. So there's a kind of a constitution that's where we, the people of a country, of a nation, write an agreement, a contract that's called a constitution about hiring your lawn to be mowed, or other things, right? The printing of the minting of money and some things like this. The contract with the British territorial government had to do with the high seas and navigable inland waterways. The municipal had to do with the 10 square miles of DC, an international meeting location. And it had to do with postal services. Anna recently in an article wrote a list. If we want, we can go directly to that list in a recent article she wrote. There's also some things there. It's the air jurisdiction. So it also had to do with patents and some things like, ideas being legally secured for a person. So anyways, what's important to know is that this portion called the States of America, we are needing to reconstruct that right now. And as we stand up our 4 pillars, we are. And once this pillar is stood up, then, and all the pillars are stood up, then we can begin to consider if we want to have this contract and reestablish this, and this contract and this contract. But we may decide that we don't want any of these contracts. We may decide that we don't really like the idea of having a confederation, because we might look back at history and say that didn't serve us well. So note that right here in the middle, it says that what federal means, this federal government, that's this layer down here. It's beneath and below. And the federal government refers to contracts. The word federal is an old word for contract, used at that time. And so the federal government is a contract government service provider type of a quote unquote government. We, the people up here, the Americans, we are the actual government. And then these down here are just businesses that are hired to complete the services we ask them to complete. This portion here is also missing. You'll notice that this Constitution in 1787 is called the Constitution for. This is a unique preposition. The other constitutions use the word of. This one is called for. It's the business called States of America with an agreement to do business for the States of America that are united. You'll notice that the united again here is not part of it's just an adjective within that name. So this is the Constitution that is for the States of America that happen to be united. United is an adjective. Then we have the territorial British government, and that Constitution happens in 1789. That's 2 years after this one. So these things are unfolding slowly over time. They don't just poof magically appear overnight. They take time, and the people are working it out, and they're having conversations. And so that's important to recognize. There's a time frame that's happening here. And this one that's created is a democracy. So when we've grown up hearing so much about democracy, it's because it's the British territorial government talking to us about living within their democracy. It is the collaboration or the conspiring with the British and the Pope against the Americans that actually was kind of like what was the insurrection that happened at the time of the Civil War. And so that one, this Constitution was happening in 1789. Now, keep in mind the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. The Civil War is not going to happen until 1863. So what begins to happen, I believe probably even in the inception or even years before this, is there's an agreement and a backroom deal going on between these two. And once they secure through the peace treaties that they're going to provide government services for us in I think it's 1823, there's the Secret Treaty of Verona. You can look up the Secret Treaty of Verona and find out exactly what the date was. But essentially, it's when these guys conspired behind our backs to take over. And what they did is they created this piece missing and this piece missing. And then because there were just people, men and women, scattered abroad, scattered around the states, and no real understanding what happened, all of a sudden, these pieces of government are undistinguishable. And over the course of decades, they cause us to only be aware of these two parts of the government, but we grow up believing these are all one. And when we know that there's an FBI, we don't know that that's municipal, and the Federal Bureau of Investigations is the territorial version of it. And they create all of these incorporated structures in order to take over. So I'm going to go back to this Constitution, this agreement, this contract was written in 1787. This one's written in 1789, and this one's written in 1790. And again, this one, remember, these are doing business as names. So this one's doing business as United States of America. When the comes before it, it's just performing the role of, it's called an article adjective. It's just an adjective. It's just saying the before States of America. The name of the business is United States of America. So that's the name of the British business doing business as, the British corporation, the corporate structure. It eventually becomes incorporated in the 1960s. I'm sorry, the 1860s. So notice it's called the Constitution of the, and then we're going to have United States of America, which is the doing business name. So this is the Constitution for the business that's called United States of America. And again, this is for the high seas and navigable inland waterways. And then there's the municipal government, the papist government. And that agreement happens in 1790, 1 year later. And really, this is largely about the 10 square miles of DC and the postal services. Postal services, although we might not be aware of this, require a good deal of security to ensure that mail is delivered. Mail is government to government. So if you are ever sent mail, know that they are misidentifying you as a franchise within their government. They're sending you government to government mail. If I were to drop something into the postal service, take it to the post office, and I were to send it to Donna and Rosie, my friends, and I put postage on my post, then they would be receiving post from me with postage on it, and it would not be government to government. So the municipal government always needed, we needed them because we were just a very young country, and they could provide the security to deliver the mail. And they agreed that they would stay on the 10 square miles of DC. That's all the agreement was for. And that they would provide a neutral meeting place for international meetings. So international, meaning, Pennsylvania, New York, Georgia, they could all come together and have a meeting in this international meeting space. So that's just a little bit about this. And this is, something that I provided because I think that it helps to simplify it. And I'm going to stop sharing this so I can go back and share the other one that's on the TASA site. because it's more complete. But I feel like to look at that one that's more simplified is helpful. And this can show you there's the three branches of the American government: the Union of States, the Federation of States. And then it says here, the Confederation of States needs to be reconstructed. This is the fourth pillar that we talk about, the international business pillar. And this one, the Federal Republic. What you'll sometimes hear said is that Trump is somehow bringing back the Federal Republic. But we know that can't be accurate and lawful and based on what existed historically. You see these arrows, they mean that that's a delegation of power. And so there's no way that someone from this created entity can move up in authority in order to create the Federal Republic. The Federal Republic is going to be created by you and I, by those who are correcting their status using the TASA paperwork. And this is why it's so important to become educated, because we really are the trailblazers, and we are really going to need to be able to stand up and take part and play a role in the reconstruction. Our American government really is of the people, by the people, for the people. And that's where you and I felt the calling that we had to raise our hand and say, for such a time as this, I was born. So again, one of the things that happened is we grew up not knowing about any of the rest of it. And we didn't know that these two separate government service providers and their entire franchise system that came below them became what we saw as one government, what we knew as we've thought it was America and the United States and the USA. We thought all of those names meant the same thing. One other thing that I want to point out real quick is how they use the names to confuse everyone. And so if you look right here at the name of this, it's called the United States, and there's the is part of the title. If you come over and look at the papal municipal government, it's called the United States, but the T is not capitalized, so it's not part of the name. So if there was a sentence being spoken and you weren't looking at it written, and someone said the United States, you wouldn't know if the T was capitalized or not, if it was the name of the Union of States, or if it was being referred to as the doing business name of the papal municipal subcontractor. A very similar thing happened when you look at the name of the Federation of States. It's called the, where the is capitalized, United States of America. And then if you look down here, the British territorial subcontractor, you can have the word the in front of the name, which is United States of America. So if someone was saying the United States of America, if they were speaking it, you wouldn't be able to see if the T was capitalized or not and exactly what they were referring to. And this made it very easy to pass things by the average population that were busy growing gardens and building businesses and having babies and raising families and homeschooling their kids and building their communities and doing all the important things that living men and women do. So because everybody was busy doing their life, it was very easy to pull off this kind of doppelganger name and all of that on the people. One other thing I like to point out is when it comes to Civil War history, they took the word Union from here, and we came to believe that was the northern states, and they took the name Confederate or Confederation, and we believed that was the southern states. But there were 34 Confederate states. That was the business assembly. And there were 34 Union states at the time of the Civil War. These are things and ways they've used words and names and tricks to deceive and to confuse and to blind people from what was really going on. So I want to share more about this in incoming trainings. I'll share that each one of these has a court, and I'll share things about, these are called United States citizens. These are U.S. citizens. These are citizens of the United States. There's so many things that can be taught from this chart. And when you begin to learn this chart and you read Anna's articles, you can begin to piece things together more quickly. I believe that what this page does is it really helps us bring these together in a way that is more quick to understand. Once I found this, all of this began to clear up a lot more. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and yield and ask what questions